How's it going, YouTube? We are back. And this time, I want to talk a little bit of boxing. We had an upset over the weekend with Magsayo, a highly talented apprentice of Manny Pacquiao from the Philippines. Upset Gary Russell Jr., who had the longest title reign of any champion in boxing at like 6 years and something like that. I have possible opponents for him coming up because now he's the champ and there's going to be a target on his back. Obviously, the first person you have to talk about is Gary Russell Jr. He hurt himself in that fight with Magsayo, so I'm assuming that he's going to want an opportunity at a rematch. He fought well. It was a tough fight. I think the decision was correct. I think Magsayo did win that fight, but having Gary Russell Jr. fight without his biggest weapon, his right-handed jab from the southpaw stance, was an obvious disadvantage for him. So I expect that to be something that is talked about in terms of his first title defense. I have a couple of other guys here that are champs in the division in 126, so maybe he wants to unify. A couple of those champs being Kiko Martinez, who is 43-10-2 with, his IBF strap. Like, he has an upcoming fight with Josh Warrington coming up, so that's going to be a tough fight. I think Warrington probably wins that fight. So maybe Kiko Martinez becomes Josh Warrington. Also, Leo Santa Cruz, who's 37-2-1, which would be a much tougher fight than Kiko Martinez, who is the WBA champ, but he also has a fight. I think Leo Santa Cruz will handle business in that fight, so Leo Santa Cruz could still be in the options for him as well if he wants to try to unify. Emmanuel Navarrete, who does not have a fight schedule, who's 35-1, the WBO champ. He's the number one ranked in the division. I don't think he fights that guy next. He's kind of, too big of a step up. Gary Russell Jr. is highly talented, but a guy that always has long layoffs out of the ring. Navarrete fights pretty regularly, so I could see that being a much bigger step up in class. And then the guy that I think he'll most likely fight, who is Ray Vargas, 35-0. He is the WBC number one ranked fighter. I just see that being the most likely option. You want to get a defense on your belt right away. The mandatory will be Ray Vargas. Unless things change in the rankings, it'll be Ray Vargas. Not ranked by Ring TV, but number one ranked in the WBC, and I believe number 4 ranked in the WBO. So I believe that'll be the most likely fight. The fight that I want to see is, if Magsayo can continue to develop into what I think he could be. I think he could be up there with Navarrete. That's the goal for me. That's the goal fight for Magsayo for me, in my opinion. The two most likely fights are Ray Vargas and Gary Russell Jr. again. I just think that with it being such a close fight against Gary Russell Jr. with an injury, I think that fight and the Ray Vargas mandatory fight are the two that are most likely in the pipeline for Magsayo this year, 2022. I see him fighting again in the summer and then maybe again in the winter. We'll see how often he wants to fight, but now he's the champ. He has a bright future ahead of him. He's still really young, extremely talented, got power, got speed. We'll see what the future holds for this talented young kid in boxing.